In 1518, a nun in a French monastery began making strange sounds. But this was just the beginning. Within a few days, the entire monastery was seized by the same madness, and this outbreak spread throughout Europe. This story took place in 1634 in the French city of Loudun, and formed one of the darkest chapters in European history. The mysterious madness outbreak that began in the convent was much more than just a religious event. It was a story of power, manipulation, and mass hysteria. If you're fascinated by these buried historical secrets, don't forget to subscribe to Buried Truths and hit that like button. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible how we're uncovering these dark secrets of history together from different parts of the world, connected by our shared curiosity about the past. Loudun was an ordinary town in northern France at the beginning of the 17th century. But the Ursuline convent located in this town would soon become a place that all of Europe would talk about. The convent was a sacred place where young women received religious education and served God. The Mother Superior of the convent, Jeanne des Anges, appeared to be a perfect religious leader from the outside. Young, intelligent, and possessing deep religious faith, Jeanne was responsible for the orderly functioning of the monastery. But beneath the surface, suppressed emotions and uncontrolled desires were simmering. In the autumn of 1634, Jeanne des Anges began exhibiting strange behaviors for the first time. During prayers, she would suddenly have trembling fits and make incomprehensible sounds. The other nuns initially thought this was a deep religious experience, but Jeanne's condition gradually worsened. At midnight, she would wander the monastery corridors, hitting the walls. During the day, she would lose herself, acting as if someone else was controlling her body. Most disturbing were the words she spoke during these fits. During her seizures, Jeanne described herself as possessed by the devil. She would recite Latin prayers backwards and mock sacred texts. Even stranger, she claimed to speak in languages she had never known before. This situation began to deeply disturb the other nuns. In the first weeks, the monastery administration tried to keep the situation secret. They thought Jeanne's illness was temporary, caused by excessive religious fervor, but events began to evolve in directions they never anticipated. The other nuns began experiencing strange feelings while watching Jeanne's fits. First just curiosity, then fear, and finally they found themselves showing similar symptoms, as if Jeanne's madness was contagious. Sister Marie was a young and impressionable nun. A few days after watching Jeanne's seizures, she too began experiencing similar tremors. She would lose control during prayers and speak incomprehensible words. The monastery administration panicked. Within a week, 5 more nuns began showing similar symptoms. Each one's seizure was slightly different, but there were common points: uncontrolled movements, strange sounds, and disrespect for sacred values. The peaceful atmosphere of the monastery was completely disrupted. The situation had reached a point where it could no longer be hidden. Local clergy from Loudun visited the monastery and were shocked by what they saw. The nuns were having seizures at completely unexpected moments and losing their normal behaviors entirely. Father Lactance was the first clergyman to report the situation. According to his records, the nuns seemed possessed by the devil. But this wasn't just traditional possession. It was a collective, organized, and increasingly widespread phenomenon. When the local government understood the seriousness of the situation, they decided to have it examined by experts. Clergy and doctors from Paris came to Loudun to evaluate what was happening at the monastery. But what they saw was unlike anything any of them had encountered before. Dr. Charles Poiret was the first doctor to examine the events from a medical perspective. According to his observations, the nuns' physical symptoms were real: high fever, uncontrolled muscle contractions, and altered consciousness. But these symptoms didn't match any known disease. The most surprising development was that the seizures weren't limited to just the monastery. Young women in the town of Loudun also began showing similar symptoms. Similar events were reported in the town market, in church, and even in private homes. Marie Renard was the daughter of the town's tailor master. She had never visited the monastery, but after hearing about the nuns' condition, she began having similar seizures. This situation showed that the event wasn't purely a religious matter. When the local government in Loudun realized the situation had gotten out of control, they requested help from the royal court. A team of experts from Paris began examining the events in more detail, but the results were much more complex than everyone expected. During the investigations, an interesting detail emerged. The common point of all cases was a priest named Father Urbain Grandier. This man was a charismatic but controversial clergyman serving in Loudun. The nuns constantly mentioned his name during their seizures. Urbain Grandier was a middle-aged, handsome, and intelligent priest, but he was also known as arrogant and fond of women. In Loudun's conservative society, his lifestyle had already become a subject of controversy. During their seizures, the nuns accused Grandier. They claimed he had written them love letters and influenced them with magic. These accusations turned Grandier's life upside down and put him in a defenseless position. Jeanne Desanges was the person making the most serious accusations. Although she had never met Grandier face to face, she claimed they had a secret relationship. Making these claims while having seizures made the situation even more mysterious. Grandier tried to defend himself. He said he had no special relationship with the nuns' monastery, and that the accusations were completely baseless. But in the atmosphere of mass hysteria, rational explanations satisfied no one. The political dimension further complicated the events. Grandier's enemies saw this situation as an opportunity to use against him. Pressures from local government, church hierarchy, and even the royal court made fair trial impossible. Cardinal Richelieu, France's powerful prime minister, showed personal interest in the event. Grandier's political views conflicted with the cardinal's policies. This situation caused the religious matter to become a political tool. While investigations continued, the situation at the monastery worsened further. Now almost all nuns were showing similar symptoms. The monastery had completely lost its normal function and had essentially become a madhouse. Louise de la Trinité, one of the youngest nuns, was only 16 years old. Her seizures were particularly violent and deeply affected viewers. The young girl's suffering showed how serious the events had become. Exorcism ceremonies began to be held. Famous clergymen came to Loudun and performed rituals to cleanse the nuns from the devil. But these ceremonies made the situation worse rather than better. Father Jean-Joseph Serene was one of the clergymen called as an exorcism expert. Even he admitted that what was happening in Loudun was very different from normal possession cases. The widespread and organized nature of the situation deeply disturbed him. Media attention made the events famous throughout Europe. Pamphlets, books, and reports were published. Loudun became a place that aroused both curiosity and fear. People flocked to the town to see these mysterious events. This attention further complicated the situation. Since the nuns were under constant observation, they began performing more dramatic shows. The line between real illness and conscious performance became blurred. Dr. S.I. Duncan, an English doctor, was one of the rare people who objectively observed the events. His reports were the first serious attempts to find a medical explanation for the situation. But the medical knowledge of that era was insufficient to explain such complex psychological events. Fear and panic spread among the local population. Parents began keeping their daughters at home. Some families left Loudun. The town's economy and social structure were seriously damaged. In 1635, the situation reached its peak. Now not only nuns, but dozens of women living in various parts of the town were showing similar symptoms. The local government even considered declaring martial law to bring the situation under control. Grandier's trial was the most dramatic phase of the events. He was accused of witchcraft, immorality, and collaborating with the devil. The trial process was far from fair and was heading toward a predetermined conclusion. During the trial, the nuns were heard as witnesses. The statements they gave while having seizures were accepted as evidence. Although this situation would be completely unacceptable according to modern legal understanding, it was considered normal under the conditions of that era. Grandier tried to defend himself, but had no chance. The combination of political forces, social pressure, and religious fanaticism made his fair trial impossible. The result was predictable by everyone. On August 18, 1634, Urbain Grandier was found guilty and sentenced to be burned alive. The execution took place in Loudun's main square, before the eyes of thousands. Grandier maintained his innocence until his final moment. After the execution, there was some improvement in the nun's condition, but this was temporary relief. Within a few months, the seizures began again, and the situation became as bad as before. This was the clearest indication that Grandier wasn't really guilty. Dr. Poiret carefully followed this evolution of events and reached important conclusions. He understood that the nun's condition was neither completely fake nor completely real, but a complex psychological phenomenon. Jeanne des Anges continued her seizures even after Grandier's death. In fact, they became even more violent. This situation showed that she was really experiencing a psychological disorder, but at the same time, she also had the ability to control the situation. By the end of 1635, a new theoretical approach began to be developed. Some enlightened clergymen and doctors suggested that the events could be mass hysteria. This was a very radical idea for that era. Father Tranquilly was one of the clergymen who supported this new approach. He argued that the nuns were really suffering, but that this was psychological illness rather than demonic possession. This view led to great controversies. The Loudun events ceased being just a local matter and became a topic discussed in Europe's intellectual circles. Great ideological differences emerged between rationalists and traditional clergymen regarding the interpretation of the events. In 1636, some of the nuns began to recover, but this recovery process was also strange. While some suddenly returned to normal without any treatment, others continued having seizures for years. Marie de Cécile was one of the first nuns to recover. In her later statements, she said she remembered what she did during her seizures, but had lost control. This showed that the situation was neither fully conscious nor fully unconscious. Work began on reorganizing the monastery. Most of the old nuns were transferred to other places, except for Jeanne des Anges and a few severe cases. All nuns were replaced. This was also a practical solution aimed at bringing the situation under control. In 1637, Loudun had become an ordinary town that no longer attracted as much attention as before. But the traces of what happened left deep wounds in the memory of the townspeople. Many families experienced the trauma of the events for years. Jeanne des Anges remained in the monastery until 1665 and continued having seizures from time to time. In her final years, she expressed regret for what she had experienced but could never fully explain what had happened. Modern psychology explains the Loudun events as cases of mass hysteria and conversion disorder. The combination of suppressed sexual desires, social pressures, and religious fanaticism can lead to such mass psychological explosions. Especially closed communities, authoritarian structures, and overly oppressive environments create ideal ground for such events. Monasteries were places that provided exactly these conditions. Perfect environment for young women's suppressed emotions to explode. The Loudun events are just one of similar mass hysteria cases seen in history. The Salem witch trials, school hysteria cases in Tanzania, and similar events in modern times are results of the same psychological mechanisms. Common characteristics of such events: closed society, authoritarian structure, suppressed emotions, a triggering event, and contagious imitative behavior. All these factors were present together in Loudun. The saddest part is that innocent people like Urbain Grandier were sacrificed. Mass hysteria destroys not only those who experience it, but also the innocent who are accused. Fear and fanaticism blind justice. Modern treatment methods can handle such situations much more effectively. Psychotherapy, drug treatments, and group therapies succeed in controlling mass hysteria cases. But the most important lesson the Loudun events teach is how complex and fragile human psychology is. When social pressures, religious dogmas, and power games come together, even the healthiest minds can collapse. This story isn't just a dark memory from the past. We see similar dynamics emerging in different forms today. In the social media age, mass hysteria can spread to larger masses more quickly. The screams of the nuns in Loudun can still be heard centuries later, because they were the voice of oppressed humanity, the rebellion of all women who were suppressed, intimidated, and silenced. Jeanne des Anges and her friends were perhaps subconsciously seeking freedom, but what they found was an even bigger prison. Social prejudices and fear deprived them of real salvation. This dark story contains important lessons both individually and socially. Where power, fear, and fanaticism combine, there's no place for innocence and reason. The nuns of Loudun became living proof of this bitter truth.